Hey everyone! Alright, today's video is going to be over theoretical and experimental probability. Your objective: I will be able to calculate and make predictions based on experimental data. Alright, so theoretical probability is what we have been talking about. It's just the probability that something should happen. That's what we expect to happen. For example, if we were to flip a coin, then we would assume it's going to land on tails half of the time. Experimental probability is the probability something happens based on actual experimental data. So let's say that someone flips a coin a total of 8 times. Theoretically, we would expect it to land on tails 4 of those times because that's half of 8. But let's say that in the experiment it landed on tails 3 times. That would be the experimental probability. And the experimental probability is found by simply writing the number of times the event occurs out of the total number of times the experiment is done. So in this pretend situation, 3 times it landed on tails out of 8 total times the coin was flipped. Now, representing the probability of the experiment is also known as relative frequency. Okay, so let's go ahead and do an experiment together. So I am going to roll a typical 6-sided die 10 times, and I want you to make sure you draw this table in your notes, and you're going to tally what the die lands on each time I roll. So let me get that pulled up for you. Okay, so here is the die. I'm going to roll it 10 times. So here is the first roll. It landed on 5. Alright, now for the second roll, it lands on 2. For the third roll, it lands on 3. For the fourth roll, it lands on 6. For the fifth roll, it lands on 4. And then for the sixth row, it lands on 6 again. Okay, we're on the 7th roll. It landed on 4. Here's the 8th roll. Lands on 6. The 9th landed on 5. And the 10th and final roll, it landed on 4. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fill in the results on my table. So it actually never landed on 1. It landed on 2 one time. It landed on 3 one time. It landed on 4 3 times. It landed on 5 twice. And it landed on 6 3 times. Alright, so what is the theoretical probability of rolling a number greater than 4? Remember, theoretical is what should happen. So if we have a typical 6-sided number cube, there are 2 numbers that are greater than 4. So that's 2 out of 6 total sides, which we would reduce to 1/3. Now we want to find the experimental probability of rolling a number greater than 4. So since it is experimental, we have to use the data from our experiment to find this probability. So a number greater than 4, that would be 5 or 6, that happened 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And we had 10 total rolls. So 5 out of 10 times it landed on a number greater than 4. And if we reduce that, that would be 1/2. So theoretically, it should only land on 5 or 6 about 1/3 of the time, but in our experiment, it actually landed on a number greater than 4 half of the time. And keep in mind, this experimental probability, the number of times it occurs out of the total number of tries, that's also known as relative frequency. Alright, let's talk about predictions. So a prediction is a reasonable guess of the outcome using quantitative and qualitative data. Quantitative is numerical data. So numerical starts with an N, and quantitative has a letter N. So quantitative has to do with numbers. Qualitative data is non-numerical, so they're not numbers. So think of this L as letters. So quantitative is numbers, qualitative is letters. So when you're describing something quantitatively, you're using numbers. Qualitatively, you are just using non-numerical words. Now, probability can help you make predictions on a larger scale. So let's take this experiment as an example. So using the data from example 1, predict how many times Mrs. Erickson will roll a 3 if she rolls the die 60 times. All right, so using the data of rolling a 3, let's go back and look at that. So out of 10 times, a 3 was only rolled once. So I'm going to write that down. So how many 3s, number of 3s out of the total number of tries? That was 1 out of 10. So now we want to predict how many 3s we could expect to roll out of 60 total tries. So since 60 is a total, I'm going to start a new ratio and put 60 on the bottom. Now I can actually set up a proportion with this. So we rolled a 3 1 out of 10 times. I want to know how many times we could expect to roll a 3 out of 60 times. So now we just have a simple proportion in which we can cross multiply and divide. So we have 1 times 60, 10 times x, so 60 equals 10x. Remember, we want to isolate the variable. We're going to divide by 10 on both sides. So x would equal 6. So we can expect to roll a 3 6 times out of 60. Okay, now it is time for you to try. So a coin is flipped 25 times. Of those flips, 17 landed on heads. For letter A, you're going to find the theoretical probability, and for letter B, you are going to find experimental probability. Keep in mind, theoretical is what should happen. Experimental is what actually happens. Make sure you get that answered on Educanon, and we will see you next class day.